Maya's day had started like any other, but by noon, everything changed. She returned home from work, tired and expecting the quiet comfort of her room, only to find her door wide open. Inside, her belongings were already half-packed, some stacked neatly, others thrown haphazardly into boxes. Her books, her personal notes, even the framed pictures of her late father, all of it displaced. And standing there, as if this was perfectly normal, were her mother, her sister Lena, and Lena's husband. The sight alone froze Maya in place. Her mother's face was calm, almost serene, as though she were performing a household duty. "It's only temporary," her mother said, as if the words alone could erase the injustice. "Lena needs this room more than you right now." Maya blinked, trying to process. Lena was married, yes, and her husband Daniel had just moved in. But Maya herself had lived in that room for years. It wasn't just a bedroom, it was her sanctuary. Every corner carried memories, late nights reading under the soft glow of her desk lamp, whispered phone calls to her father before he passed, moments of solitude when the world outside felt too heavy. And now all of that was being erased with one sentence. "You didn't even ask me," Maya said finally, her voice calm but sharp. It wasn't a scream, but the tone carried weight. Inside, a storm had begun to gather, and she could feel it coiling tight, ready to strike. Her mother's reply was rehearsed, almost practiced. "You're single. You work late. You barely use the room. Lena deserves stability now." Maya's stomach sank. Deserve, that word hung in the air like a verdict. It wasn't about fairness or family. It was about favoritism, about choosing convenience over loyalty. Lena smiled faintly, avoiding Maya's eyes, relief flickering across her face. She didn't even try to hide that she felt victorious, and it burned Maya more than any anger she had felt in years. Maya's first instinct was to argue, to fight for her space, for her voice to be heard. But she realized something in that moment. Arguing would not change anything. Her mother had made up her mind, and Lena was safely shielded by her husband's presence. Maya's anger simmered, deep and slow, almost silent, but it was there. She could feel it in her chest, steady, patient. She nodded once, her face betraying nothing, and turned away. The suitcase in her hand felt heavier than usual. She stepped into the hallway, leaving the room behind. That night, Maya lay on the guest bed, a space not meant for her, cramped and unfamiliar. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over. Every time she thought about it, the betrayal felt sharper. Her mother, someone she had trusted, someone who had always been a protector, had chosen Lena over her. Chosen convenience, appearances, the illusion of fairness over love and respect. Maya thought about Lena too. Her sister, who had always been competitive, who had always measured success by what she could take from others, now had everything she wanted handed to her on a silver platter. And Daniel, her husband, smug and confident, seemed to float above. The consequences? Believing his charm and his business acumen made him untouchable. Maya's mind raced, noting every detail, every weakness, every overlooked mistake. By the next day, Maya had made a quiet decision. She would not show her anger. Not yet. She would go about her life invisible, unnoticed, while she observed and collected information. Every smile she gave her family, every polite word, every nod of agreement was a calculated act. She became a ghost in her own house, silent and watchful. People assumed she was defeated, but inside she was far from it. As the days passed, she began to notice cracks in the facade. Daniel's confidence was not as solid as it seemed. He bragged often about investments and profits, yet he avoided specific questions about numbers. Lena, who had always been sharp, was defensive when discussing finances, brushing off concerns with nervous laughter. And her mother, proud and decisive as she appeared, began to ask subtle questions, seeking reassurance, sensing tension she couldn't quite place. Maya started keeping quiet notes to herself, recording observations in a small notebook no one could find. She tracked bills, inconsistencies, and decisions that didn't add up. Each piece of information became a thread in a web she was weaving silently. She did not plan immediate revenge, did not react impulsively. Instead, she let time pass, sharpening her understanding, analyzing her family's strengths and weaknesses. Like a strategist preparing for a battle, even as she worked her day job and pretended everything was normal. Maya's mind never rested. The guest room, the intrusion, the betrayal, it all fueled a growing determination. She replayed every scene from that day, examining emotions, reactions, and words. Every interaction became a clue, a detail to add to her understanding of how her family operated. One evening, Maya's mother knocked on the guest room door. She entered, sitting on the edge of the bed with a gentle look. "I know this was hard," she said. "I hope you understand we did what we thought was best." Maya looked at her mother without emotion. "I understand," she said. But inside, she was calculating, evaluating, storing away every nuance of tone, every hesitation, every unsaid word. Understanding did not mean forgiving. Understanding meant preparing. That night, Maya made her first real plan. Not a plan for violence or public humiliation, but a plan for power. If her mother and sister thought they could dismiss her, if they believed she could be ignored and sidelined, they were wrong. Maya would wait, observe, and strike with precision. She would not let emotion cloud her judgment. Would wait for the right moment when their confidence was highest and their vulnerabilities most exposed. She remembered something her father had once told her. Strength isn't in the fight you win today. Strength is in the patience you have to wait for the right moment. Maya clung to that memory, feeling a strange calmness settle over the storm of betrayal. She wasn't powerless. She wasn't defeated. She was gathering strength, hidden in plain sight, and her family had no idea who they had truly underestimated. The betrayal of her room, the favoritism shown to Lena, had been a shock. But shock faded, and in its place grew a quiet, unstoppable resolve. Maya realized that revenge wasn't just about taking back what was lost, was about reclaiming her identity, proving her worth, and showing her family that underestimating her had consequences far beyond a single room. And with that thought, Maya closed her notebook, turned off the light, and lay in the small, unfamiliar bed. Outside, the house seemed peaceful. Unaware of the storm gathering quietly in the mind of the daughter they thought they had sidelined, Maya was no longer just a victim. She was preparing. She was watching. And when the time came, she would not just reclaim what was taken. She would redefine the rules of the game entirely. Days turned into weeks, but Maya's life at home remained tense. She moved quietly through the house, polite and invisible, but every glance, every gesture was calculated. She had learned that patience was a weapon, and she wielded it with precision. Lena and Daniel thought she had accepted her fate, that she was meek and powerless. They had no idea that Maya was watching, learning, and planning. Maya spent her nights reviewing every detail she had observed. She made notes about Daniel's business dealings, about his inconsistencies and his overconfidence. She noticed how he bragged about investments that didn't make sense, how his excuses became more elaborate with every question. Lena, too, had cracks. She laughed nervously when her husband was questioned, brushed off warnings from friends, and relied entirely on Daniel's charm. Her mother, blinded by trust, had lent them money and made decisions as if Maya's existence didn't matter. Maya realized that knowledge was her true power. She didn't need to shout, confront, or make threats. She could wait, watch, and use what she learned when the moment was right. Each discovery made her feel more in control, more confident that she was not just a victim, but a strategist. At the same time, a storm brewed inside her. Maya wrestled with the temptation to act immediately. The urge for revenge pulsed like an electric current, whispering in her mind. She imagined exposing Daniel, humiliating him in front of Lena and their mother. She pictured reclaiming her room. In a dramatic confrontation, the thrill of immediate retribution tempted her, but she knew that acting too soon could ruin everything. Patience would yield a better, cleaner victory. Maya's nights were long, filled with planning and imagining. Outcomes. She mapped out every scenario, considering every decision her family might make. She analyzed Daniel's habits, noting the moments when he was careless or distracted. She traced Lena's routines, the way she depended on Daniel, and the vulnerabilities that reliance created. She understood her mother's thought patterns, the ways she tried to maintain harmony at the expense of fairness. Despite her careful observation, Maya also struggled with her conscience. She knew revenge could be satisfying, but it could also destroy her. Could she live with herself if she deliberately caused pain, even to those who had wronged her? Each night she debated the moral line, weighing justice against cruelty. The internal struggle was exhausting, but it sharpened her focus. She realized that true power wasn't just in winning, it was in deciding how to win without losing herself while planning. Maya also found herself preparing for the unexpected. She knew that Daniel and Lena were unpredictable. Daniel's pride could make him lash out, and Lena's defensiveness could ruin a carefully laid plan. Maya learned to anticipate mistakes, understanding that their overconfidence was her advantage. Every slip, every lie, every unguarded moment would give her leverage when the time came. Maya's work outside the house became a cover for her strategy. She excelled at her job, maintaining a composed professional image while silently gathering information. She networked with people who had connections to Daniel's business, carefully asking questions and listening for discrepancies. Each piece of information was filed in her mind, a puzzle piece she would use to complete the picture. She stayed calm, letting others underestimate her. Her invisibility was her greatest asset. Her emotional state was a careful balance of anger, patience, and self-control. Maya refused to let frustration dictate her actions. Instead, she turned it into focus, a relentless drive that fueled every observation and calculation. She had learned that acting from emotion led to mistakes, and mistakes could destroy her plan. She was methodical, precise, and unwavering. Maya also explored different possibilities in her mind. She considered confronting Daniel directly, exposing his lies immediately, but dismissed the idea. She imagined informing her mother of every mistake, humiliating her sister in the process. But she realized that would only give her family a chance to defend themselves, to scramble and possibly protect Daniel. The best path was to wait, to let the truth emerge naturally. Guided by the information she controlled, she became adept at reading body language and detecting dishonesty. She noticed the small things, the way Daniel avoided eye contact when questioned, Lena's nervous fidgeting, her mother's hesitant tone when discussing money. These small signals confirmed what Maya already suspected. Their confidence was a fragile facade, and once it cracked, there would be no way to rebuild. Maya's mental preparation was mirrored by physical readiness. She organized her personal belongings, created secure backups of her notes, and ensured that no one could access her plans. Her room may have been taken from her, but her mind was untouchable. She had created a space that was entirely hers, filled with control, strategy, and foresight. Even as she watched and waited, Maya allowed herself brief moments of reflection. She remembered the injustice of being pushed aside, the way her mother had favored Lena without understanding the consequences. She felt the sting of betrayal, the quiet rage that had taken root in her chest. But she also felt clarity. Betrayal had revealed the truth about her family, and that truth gave her power. One evening, Maya noticed a critical opportunity. Daniel had made a risky financial decision, one that could easily fail if exposed. Lena was unaware of the full scope of the problem, relying entirely on Daniel's assurance. Maya observed quietly, taking mental notes, calculating potential outcomes. She realized that the moment to act was approaching, but she had to remain patient. Any misstep now could alert them, and her advantage would vanish. At the same time, Maya reflected on her own moral compass. She did not want to become someone cruel, someone who took joy in another's pain. Kay's goal was not destruction, it was justice and reclaiming agency over her life. She understood that revenge could be satisfying, but it could also leave wounds that lasted longer than the initial betrayal. Her challenge was to achieve her goal without losing herself in the process. Maya's patience paid off in small ways. She observed Daniel making careless errors, Lena's growing anxiety, and her mother's increasing unease. Each piece of evidence added to her understanding, building a clear picture of the vulnerabilities that had been hidden beneath their confident exteriors. She realized that when the time came, she could expose the truth with precision, controlling the outcome rather than letting chance decide. Throughout this period, Maya became both strategist and observer. She maintained her day-to-day life, kept her family unaware of her intentions, and quietly gathered information. Her emotional discipline strengthened her resolve. Every day reinforced the knowledge that power was not in reaction, but in control. She learned to act only when necessary, to strike only when it would be most effective. By the end of part 2, Maya had transformed. The girl who had been quietly pushed out of her room was now a calculated, focused individual, aware of her family's weaknesses and ready to reclaim her power. She had wrestled with anger, temptation, and moral uncertainty, emerging with a clear understanding of what she could do and who she wanted to be. Maya's patience, intelligence, and careful planning had positioned her to confront the situation with clarity. She was ready to face the next stage, not with blind rage, but with strategic insight. The foundation for her eventual choice, whether revenge or restraint, was now firmly in place. She knew that the moment of decision was approaching, and she would meet it not as a victim, but as someone in complete control of her own destiny. And in that quiet preparation, Maya discovered something more important than revenge: the power to define her future, to decide how she would respond to betrayal, and to prove silently but undeniably that she was not to be underestimated. The tension in the house had grown over the weeks, subtle but undeniable. Maya felt it every time she passed the living room, every time she overheard hushed conversations between Lena and Daniel. The fragile confidence they had worn like armor was cracking, and Maya knew the moment she had prepared for was drawing near. She felt a quiet thrill of anticipation, tempered by her own restraint. She wasn't here to destroy for the sake of anger. She was here to reclaim control, to assert herself in a way that was precise and deliberate. It began one evening with raised voices drifting from the living room. Maya, sitting at the kitchen table, pretended to focus on her laptop but listened intently. Lena was crying, her voice cracked with frustration, fear, and confusion. Daniel's tone was sharp, defensive, even panicked. He insisted everything was fine, but his words lacked conviction. Maya's mother, caught between them, asked cautious questions, her earlier confidence giving way to unease. The scene was a mirror of every observation Maya had made. The culmination of weeks of planning and waiting. Maya stood in the hallway, unseen, heart steady but mind racing. She watched her sister's vulnerability, Daniel's faltering composure, and her mother's growing anxiety. This was the moment when the balance of power could shift completely. She could step in, expose Daniel's mistakes in a way that left him humiliated, force Lena to confront her blind trust, and finally reclaim her place. Every scenario she had imagined came alive before her eyes. But as she stepped closer, Maya paused. She realized something crucial. Revenge might bring immediate satisfaction, but it would leave scars not just for Daniel and Lena, but for herself. She thought of the anger she had carried for weeks, the plotting and calculation. and recognized that lashing out could transform her into the very person she despised, a person consumed by bitterness. The temptation was strong, electric, and tempting. Every instinct screamed for retribution. Maya made her choice. She would act, but differently. She would use the information she had gathered not to destroy, but to guide. She entered the living room calmly, and the three of them froze. Maya's presence carried authority, a quiet confidence that drew attention without intimidation. Had learned that sometimes power was in control, not chaos. "Daniel," she said, voice steady, "I think it's time we look at the numbers carefully." Daniel froze. He knew in that instant that Maya had discovered the truth. His usual bravado faltered. Lena looked at her sister with wide eyes, a mix of hope and fear. Their mother's hands trembled as she reached for a chair, sensing that Maya held the upper hand. Instead of launching into accusations, Maya presented facts. She calmly outlined discrepancies in Daniel's business, pointing out inconsistencies, overlooked details, and risky decisions that had led to the current situation. She didn't yell, she didn't berate. She delivered truth with precision, clarity, and calm authority. The power of her approach was undeniable. Daniel's confidence crumbled further with each revelation. His excuses faltered, and he realized that Maya's knowledge was not superficial. She had been watching, studying, preparing. Every lie, every misstep, every small miscalculation had been noticed. He could no longer hide behind charm or deflection. Lena listened in stunned silence, the tears on her cheeks reflecting the shock of realization. She had trusted Daniel blindly, relied on him entirely, and now she saw the reality that had been there all along. Maya's mother, too, was shaken. She had acted out of faith and favoritism, but the consequences of those choices were laid bare. Then, Maya did something unexpected. She offered solutions. She explained steps they could take to mitigate the damage, to rebuild what could still be saved. She outlined legal avenues, financial corrections, and ways to avoid repeating past mistakes. Her words were not just information, they were a lifeline. She had the knowledge and foresight to guide them through the consequences of their actions, but she refused to become their executioner. The room was silent for a long moment. Daniel looked at Maya with a mix of fear, respect, and shame. Lena's sobs slowed as comprehension set in. Their mother's expression softened, tinged with guilt and newfound understanding. Maya's restraint had created a situation where accountability was inevitable, but destruction was not. She had exacted a different kind of justice, one that preserved her integrity while exposing the truth. After the tension dissipated, Maya retreated to her guest room, her heart still pounding but steady. She realized that this was more powerful than revenge. She had demonstrated that she was not to be underestimated, that her intelligence and patience were assets far greater than anger. She had claimed victory without cruelty, without allowing herself to become the very thing she despised. Weeks later, the household dynamics shifted. Daniel moved out, forced to confront the consequences of his choices. Lena took responsibility for her actions, learning lessons that Maya had long recognized, but only now became painfully clear to her sister. Their mother, humbled by the experience, began to treat Maya with newfound respect, acknowledging her wisdom and restraint. One evening, Maya's mother approached the now empty room, the room that had once been taken from Maya. "It's yours," he said quietly. Hope and remorse mixed in her tone. Maya paused. She looked at the walls, the familiar corners, and the space she had once called her sanctuary. But something had changed. She realized she no longer needed the room to assert her value or claim her power. She had already reclaimed her position, her voice, and her self-respect. The room itself was no longer the prize. "I'm moving out," Maya said softly but firmly. Her mother blinked, a mixture of surprise and understanding crossing her face. Maya's decision was final, but it carried no bitterness. She was leaving not out of anger, but out of clarity. She understood that true strength was not in controlling others, but in controlling oneself. As she packed her things, Maya reflected on everything she had learned. Betrayal had tempted her with revenge, but restraint had given her something more valuable: freedom, control, and self-respect. She realized that revenge could bring temporary satisfaction, but it could also create new pain, new resentment, and a cycle that never ended. Her choice had broken that cycle. Maya left the house with a quiet confidence. She carried with her not only her belongings, but the knowledge that she had navigated betrayal with intelligence, morality, and foresight. She had faced the climax of her journey, the confrontation, the decision, the temptation, and emerged not as a victim, not as a vengeful figure, but as someone who had mastered herself. And in that mastery lay the ultimate victory. The family that had underestimated her now recognized, silently and uncomfortably, that Maya was far stronger than they had imagined. They had believed they could push her aside, manipulate her, and take what they wanted. But they had failed to see that strength is not always loud or immediate. Sometimes it is patient, quiet, and unstoppable. Maya's story ended not with destruction, but with revelation and growth. She had faced betrayal, temptation, and moral uncertainty. She had acted decisively, but with integrity. And in doing so, she discovered the truth about power, that it is not in punishment, but in knowing when to act, how to act, and most importantly, when to walk away. As she stepped into her new life, Maya felt a sense of liberation that no revenge could have ever provided. The room that had been taken from her no longer mattered. What mattered was her agency, her choices, and the knowledge that she could face any challenge, any betrayal, and emerge stronger, wiser, and unbroken. Maya's journey had come full circle. She had been wronged, but she had turned that wrong into strength. She had resisted the temptation of immediate revenge, choosing instead a path that preserved her integrity and ensured her long-term freedom. And in that choice, she had discovered a power greater than anger, greater than resentment, power to define her own destiny.